Welcome back to the 284th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, talking about the old age in our country, but not just in our country, at the top of our country, the leaders of our country, whether it be from Joe Biden shuffling into the presidency, to the Gerontocracy that is running the country, to how Biden actually might bounce back after his poor debate performance. And of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into not our daily debate. We're going to do our dip, dive, dodge segment. Roll the intro here.
Let's get ready to dip, dive, and dodge.
How this works is I am going to have two policy proposals, one that is presented as if a reporter is asking me and I'm a politician, and then I'm going to have the one that I want to get to. I don't want to answer their question. I want to pivot towards my talking point, and that's what I'm going to try to do. And I'm also going to try to include a little bit of a paid promotion, or necessarily paid, but a promotion for something that I'm doing in there as well. And the framing for this one, I'm going to be a red state governor, or more accurately, more like a purple state governor. I'm going to be the governor of Nevada. So I haven't looked at these yet. Let's go over to the first one. I'm going to pretend that I'm the reporter. Governor Smith, throughout your time as the governor of Nevada, you have talked about the future of our state, the education system, trying to privatize it. But one of the things that deeply concerns the people here in Nevada is the water rights issue, considering that a lot of private companies are actually buying up water rights all across the state. There has been some talk about making the water rights, or these large reserves, a public utility and something akin to a Water Conservation and Reclamation Act. What would you say to the people who are concerned about these issues? Oh, well, thank you, my friend from the New York Times. I greatly appreciate you coming out here today, and I understand what the people that are very intrigued by these sort of issues. I also understand that they feel as though their futures are being put up into the hands of private companies, and they may not actually have the rights to their water in the future. And we want to make sure that every single Nevadan has their future in their own hands. That is why I have also implemented I want to implement a state health savings account. This isn't something that you have to do if you are employed throughout Nevada, but it is a opt-in thing that we're going to have every single company have, so that you can actually put money away. It's automatically open for you, and you can opt into it by putting money away for your health insurance costs later on. It comes directly out of your paycheck, just like your Social Security benefits. So you don't even have to think about spending that extra money that would possibly be used for groceries. You don't even have to worry about it. It is instantly saved for you if you do a recurring balance, maybe $50, $100 per paycheck. And this is something that we want to do to ensure that Nevadans have a good retirement and that their future is secure in their own hands. And this is something that I've talked about relentlessly on multiple places, and also on my podcast, Innovating for the Future. These are the sort of innovative policies that, while they seem as though they are something that is compelling people to do something under the state, it's actually providing more options while not being mandatory. And it's done at a low budget, because all we had to do is say that they had to open up these accounts which already existed. These companies had to open up these accounts that have already existed with many of these insurance companies. So thank you for your question very much, and I am looking out for the future of all Nevadans, and I hope you have a wonderful day. So that's the whole idea of the dip, dive, dodge. You can see I dipped and dived, and I didn't necessarily dodge properly. And honestly, if someone gave that answer, the reporter would probably say, sir, I don't think you actually answered my question, because I kind of just veered off of it very, very quickly. But the point being, it's a fun little segment. So thank you for joining me for that one. But we've gotten the fun stuff out of the way. Let's get into the more serious stuff. Our first article comes from The Dispatch, from Jonah Goldberg, and the headline reads, "Shuffling for President." And I'll be honest, a lot of people give Jonah Goldberg some flack, and I've read a few of his articles now, and I don't always agree with all of his opinions, but they at least feel well thought out, and he seems to really be consistent, at least between the 3-4 that I've been reading. Then again, I've put a tab on him now. I'm going to follow him a little bit more closely, see how all of his different worldviews shape up together. But he brings together a very interesting piece today talking about how Joe Biden, after the debate performance, the Biden lovers, the people in his administration, have basically come out and said, no, we can't do anything about it. He basically is already in. He deserves the presidency. You can't even criticize him. And Jonah Goldberg is coming in saying, no. Nobody deserves the presidency. Nobody deserves that power. Sure, they can get elected to it, but you don't have an outright, you don't have the right to it at all. You do not have the right to be president. You do not inherently have the ability to truly live up to the station of that office, no matter who you are. And I think it's maybe elevating the presidency a little bit too much, but it is at least an important perspective, especially now when we're seeing lots of counter narratives about the old age as present within our democracy, really that being exemplified by President Joe Biden. Quote, look, I am first to concede that being president is about more than being able to conduct press conferences. So he's talking about where this president is lacking specifically, but also how it's highlighted and how we actually know that he is lacking now and that his old age is actually affecting his ability to do the job. Quote, in fact, I think a lot of performative stuff, including debates, should be given less weight in our politics. But that's the point. Being president is more than just being able to conduct press conferences, in the same way that being a professional basketball player is about more than being able to dribble the ball. But if you can't dribble the ball, it doesn't really matter whether you can do anything else. Happy Gilmore was great at hitting hockey pucks, but he couldn't skate, so he took up golf. A surgeon needs to be able to do more than make an incision. But if he can't do that, we don't need to inquire further about whether he's qualified to remove an appendix. End quote. And this is extremely, extremely important. And this is the baseline skill of a politician. And what he's talking about here are baseline skills. He's not saying that, that's the most important thing. Okay. In the case of the surgeon, being able to make a clean cut, that's the most important thing. No. Being able to actually make sure that you're observing everything that's going on inside the chest, making sure that the heart gets placed in properly, that there's not a rejection to follow. All these different things are very important too. And some would argue they're more important than the initial incision. And just like with the presidency, having different foreign policy proposals, trying to shore up trade, how you go about any given proposal, policy, actually use executive power in this world of the administrative state. Nowadays, you could say that being an effective executive is using that executive power. You can do all of those things, but it's still a baseline skill to be able to communicate what you're doing. And that's not just for the presidency. That is for all politicians. That is what sets apart the Joe Schmo who is running for governor in the local town and can't get into a congressional seat, and someone who makes it to a congressional seat. Not all of them are perfect, but they at least are able to appeal to a wider audience because they are either more articulate or they're so straight to the point that they have really basic language, like Donald Trump. Most of his stuff, he reminds me of certain people I know who don't necessarily complete their sentences and their thoughts. You know what they're saying, but they don't fully write, they don't speak like they're writing a sentence, is what I'm trying to get at. And that is something that is a skill. It's a way to communicate. And that is necessary when you're a politician. If you cannot communicate what your goals are, what your achievements are, or even just ask questions about what you're doing, then it's not going to go well for you. And when you are on the cameras, when you are on that stage, the cameras are pointed at you, and you have to answer these questions, or you even have to be in a debate where it's not scripted. These are your moments to show up when you're supposed to allow yourself to present as someone who's confident, who understands what they're doing, and is able to get their message across to every American who's watching, even to people across the world that are watching as well. Does the debate play more in the United States than other countries? Sure, but I can guarantee you clips, if not at least the first part of it, was watched by foreign dignitaries, and maybe that's because it went badly, but also if it goes well for a president, they have a muscular position on certain issues, and they're communicating it well enough, that clip's going to go around the world, and it's going to show that this person is capable and competent of doing the job. And this is something that happens as you get older. And this is, I'm not trying to make a point specifically about Joe Biden. This is a point about older people in life in general. And to be fair, I know plenty of old people that are sharper than me, smarter than me, that would run around me no problem whatsoever. I am just a dumb commentator. But there is no doubt that as you get older, there is a certain point, it's different for everybody, but there is a certain point when your ability to communicate goes downhill. Whether that's because it's harder for you to get the words out, whether that's because it's just harder for you to think clearly in general. All of those things, whichever one it is, it does not matter, because at the end of the day, it is stifling your ability to communicate. And you need to be able to communicate when you're on the Hill. You need to be able to communicate to the people that you're representing, but also you need to be able to communicate the point, the essence of what the people you're representing want to everybody else. You have to be able to fight for their vision, whatever they want. And let's be clear, that's how politics should work. And if we're in a pure populist world, that's probably, I take that back, it's not probably how it would work, because it would still be politics. But in a world where the politicians truly care about the people, that's how it is. They are communicating the message, the needs, the concerns of the people back home. And that requires you to be effective, get the message across concisely, and be able to convince people across coalitions that this is going to benefit my people, but also you have to make the argument that's going to benefit their people, that it's going to benefit the party, that this is good overall. Whatever it may be, you have to be able to get that message across. This is all about communication. It's always hilarious, because the idea that goes through Republicans and Democrats is, oh, well, every once in a while when a message or when a policy proposal doesn't work, or when the policy that they're putting forward seems to be very unpopular with the American people, it's always, oh, it's a messaging problem. Oh, it's a messaging problem. And normally when they say that, that's baloney. It's not always, it sometimes is a messaging problem, because guess what? You can warp the messaging. You could do like Dick Cheney and take a whole bunch of surveys and see what messaging works best. So instead of saying a wealth tax or inheritance tax, you say a death tax. Sure. If you want to say that, yes, our manipulative messaging isn't working, fair enough. But to say that, oh, no, it's just the messaging, the people just don't understand, that's normally not the case. So I'm not trying to say, oh, well, it's all about messaging. But it is about the fact that even if you can't get that message that people don't understand out, if you can't even get the message that people are not going to agree with out of your mouth, if you can't even communicate it, then yes, it is about messaging, because you don't have an effective messenger. And that is something that we should be concerned about as a nation. So when you read pieces like this that try to really break it down, and they're looking at the criticism after the fact of a lot of the people in the media, a lot of Democrats have come out and said, hey, Joe Biden needs to be out. Like I said after the debate, I did a little debate special after the debate. I said, a lot of people are saying some things. I don't think it's going to change anything. I think the Biden team's going to lock in. I think that eventually the media is going to come around to it. And honestly, the last article that we'll present today kind of shows how that narrative starts to shift a little bit, showing, oh, well, Biden's addressing these questions and this is what he could do in the future. And it's kind of laying a brick path forward for him to get himself out of this. And it is very, very interesting for sure. But I want to go to this next paragraph that talks about a different argument that is in the same vein, though. Quote, the second argument is that whatever the extent of his infirmity, he's still the best candidate to beat Trump. That might be true. I do think Kamala Harris would be a very weak candidate. I've said from the beginning that Biden's major blunder was picking her as a running mate, blah, 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 blah. Quote, in other words, any other Democrat could actually run for president. The best Biden can do is shuffle for president. And why did I just skip over there? Because what he's pointing out is there are other candidates out there, but there are not easy candidates out there. There are not people that will be able to garner the same attention, that will be able, on a practical note, to actually take on the funding that the Biden and Kamala campaign has put together so far. Because anyone else that would come in, they would have to start absolutely fresh from the beginning. The money would not be transferred to them. So he's saying, oh yeah, other Democrats could definitely run, but it wouldn't necessarily go well. So we're kind of stuck with the shuffling old man. And so you're probably saying, okay, where does he really get into the deserving here? Because that's why I read this article. And I'm going to read this last quote before we move on to the next one, because I do want to talk. I want to give the last article a little bit more time than I normally do for our third articles. Quote, But let's get back to the idea of deserving, because I think it illuminates a more fundamental problem with our politics. You know who else doesn't deserve to be president? This is what I was saying at the beginning, his point, quote, everyone. Sure, the candidate who wins the most electoral votes deserves, quote unquote, to be president because of those other rules. That's the procedural point, not a moral one. The procedural point doesn't have anything to do with the way we talk about this stuff. Harris's prospects are rising for all the obvious reasons. And then I'm going to skip a little bit. Quote, but the arguments on her behalf that get all the play are based on other considerations. She's a woman. She's black. It would be insulting to pass over her. But the political arguments why these matter don't matter as much as I said the procedural ones earlier about the war chest, about the fact that she would be able to retain the money and Biden wouldn't. She's an obvious second pick because guess what? Biden put her on the ticket. Quote, think about it this way. In sports, the winner isn't the person who works the hardest or wants it more. Isn't the person who deserves it more because they have a moving personal underdog story. It isn't even necessary that the most skilled player or team, the player or team that scores the most points. So that's what he's saying. He's saying whether or not you think they deserve it, whether or not they're putting in the hours, sometimes there's more things to consider than just hard work, just the underdog story, just what's politically expedient, so on and so forth. You don't just get things handed to you. You have to work at it, but sometimes you also have to have things fall your way. And right now, the political moment is not falling by Harris's way. Harris, some of her polling looks good, some of her polling doesn't. A lot of the American people, I think, are rather apoplectic. Excuse me, that makes them sound angry. They have a lot of apathy towards her, for sure. But that's talking about the Biden case. I want to move on to the broader point that we were making. I was talking about it a little bit here about communicating and the fact that as you get older, it's harder to communicate. I was really spurred on to this because of this Daily Beast article, headline reading, our U.S. geriocracy needs to go, and Biden isn't even the worst. And this is something where I wanted to broaden it out because we talked about Biden in the first one. We'll return to Biden in the last one, but they have a point here that no, he ain't the oldest person in our government that is doing things. It has pictures here of multiple different people supplying their ages. If you want to see their funny graphic, the link is in the description below that like and subscribe button. So let's jump into the first few paragraphs. And it will really highlight what they're trying to get at, the point they're trying to really throw into people's faces. Quote, their articles on the heel of Mitch McConnell, then a youthful 81, being escorted away from a television press conference after he froze without explanation for 20 seconds. Teen Vote explained that the word meant, quote, a government ruled by the elderly. They're talking about a gerontocracy. Quote, at a press conference 2 weeks later, McConnell froze again, this time for 30 seconds. Within a month of that, Dianne Feinstein passed away at age 90, and yet she was not removed from her Senate seat. She was holding up committee appointments because she was sick, and she was making lots of comments that were pretty obvious that she didn't know where she was. So that was another shocking example. I can't believe that we moved on past that one so quickly. But then again, she passed. Obviously, I don't want to disparage her name. There were other people at play that were keeping her there. Nancy Pelosi may have been one of them. This is speculation, though. Speculation. Quote, while still a sitting U.S. senator, she had missed 2 months of work earlier that year, stalling many crucial votes for President Joe Biden's judicial and executive nominees, but died hours after her final vote. The presidential debate last week shone a laser light on Biden's age, but it ought to force a wider discussion about why the U.S. Congress is one of the oldest in global politics and what it means for representative democracy, end quote. And whether or not I necessarily agree with every single argument they're going to make, because they're going to make an argument throughout this, which is if you're ruling class, and I hate using the class words. If we say the people that are elected to represent us are all older, let me ask you this. If you are above the age of 50, what does bet mean? If you are above the age of 50, maybe this one reached you, but what is giving you the ick mean? If you're above the age of 50, if you're above the age of 60, what does it mean that they didn't have the what's the word? I see, even I don't know it because I'm not engaged in the youth culture. It's the Riz. Oh, that was it. Oh gosh, the Riz. Oh my gosh, I hated that one. But my point being that, and these are all cultural terms, but my point being is if you don't understand that, you can't necessarily understand what these people are saying to you, but also you're just out of touch. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I'll be honest, if you don't know what the Riz is, if you don't know what bet is, it's probably a good thing for your sanity. You're probably sitting there saying, why are these kids using these words? And that is fair enough. But that does mean that you don't actually understand the issues that those people may care about. You don't have a insight into their mind. You do not understand the perspective of a younger person, and you're supposed to represent them. So if your district is all, 70 to 90-year-olds, great. I'm so happy that you are representing your people. We have a representative democracy. And that doesn't mean, and like I said, it doesn't mean that everybody has to look the same. It doesn't mean, okay, so this district is 90% this demographic, the person has to be this demographic. No, but the ideas of the people, the worldview of the people, sure. And let's be clear, older people can represent the worldview of younger people. There's no doubt about that. But there are definitely going to be larger gaps the more generations you get away. And when we don't have as many rising young stars, which there are some in both parties, there's no doubt about that. But compared to in the past, when the older generations were willing to give up the reins, and actually they were willing to train the next generation, you had an effective change of power, you had an effective perspective change, or at least a smooth transition in ushering. Now, Nancy Pelosi has done that. Hakeem Jeffries has stepped up in the House. When she stepped down, I was saying to myself, okay, she's looking at the long game, she said she's going to run again, but she's giving off the power, she's giving him time to actually do the job while she's still there to be an advisor. That's actually a smart move on her part. And we do see some younger speakers on the Republican side as well. Mitch McConnell, he kind of has a little grooming system going on, but the next three to take his position once he's gone are basically 60s and up, which is fine, I guess, but even then, maybe you should have a 50-year-old in there, a 51-year-old who just is having kids that are just going through college, getting out of college, who is a little bit more invested in the future of their children. Maybe these are all considerations that need to be taken into account, and that's why when this article talks about what it means for representative democracy, they're not necessarily saying that being old is bad. They're saying that it's not going to give you an accurate depiction of what the rest of the country thinks, the perspectives of parents in the country. Because guess what? Mitch McConnell, his kids, they are what, 40 plus years old. If you are a 70-year-old, you probably, at the youngest kid you're probably going to have is what, 25, unless you're a male who has a really young wife, but you're probably going to have maybe 30-year-old kids, 35-year-old kids, and I would say maybe even 40-year-old kids. You're not in touch with the young generation, and you're not even looking out for the next generation in your kids. You can't even say, oh, well, okay, I'm concerned about this for my son's future, my daughter's future, which you may think, oh, well, Alex, that doesn't matter. They can still think about the next generation. Fair enough, but it's really easy. It's really easy when the daughter of a representative, the son of a representative, comes to them and says, hey, this is an issue that I've been facing. Have you had anything talk to you about this? Oh, this is a real life example of it happening. Doesn't mean it's going to sway their opinion. Doesn't mean they're going to change. Fair enough, but it does at least provide an insight and an emotional pathos argument that can be used to help persuade them, to give them insight into what should be done, what this next generation cares about, and what they're facing out there in America. So my point being, overall, actually, before I get into the overall point, I just want to list out all the ages here before we move on to the final article, which is a must-do, and I want to give it its fair dues. So here is some of the gerontocracy. Quote, Senator Charles E. Grassley, Chuck Grassley of Iowa, Republican, 89. Republican Rep. Grace F. Napolitano of California, 86. Bill Pascrell Jr. of New Jersey, 86. Harold Rogers of Kentucky, 86. Maxine Waters of California, 85. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Emeritus of California, 84. James E. Clyburn of South Carolina, 83. He clutched the win for Biden, basically, with the South Carolina votes that he brought in. Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, 82. So you can see here. Now, let's be clear. That doesn't mean, oh, there are old people. Okay, it doesn't mean that they're all the most influenced. Well, guess what? Chuck Grassley, very influential, if not actually on the floor in the operating, actually on the media. Bill Parcell, not so much necessarily. Grace Napolitano, not so much. Harold Rogers, not so much. Maxine Waters, a little bit. Nancy Pelosi, especially. James Clyburn, like I said, basically clutched the situation for Biden in South Carolina. So you could say that's important. And Bernie Sanders is a thought leader on one side. Then again, does he have as much power as he wants? No, he kind of just votes along with the Democrats because that's all he can do. But the point being that some of them are very influential, and this is just the ones that are above 80, okay? If we're looking into people that are closer to Trump's age, and people have been making arguments that Trump's age is too much during this cycle, then we're looking at a really old generation, and there's not many young bucks coming through, at least definitely not in the Senate. In the House, we have a few of them. There's no doubt about that. So, with all that said, we talked about the gerontocracy. Now, let's move on to the spin. We're going to look at how they're trying to repair the image of our old leader, to say, oh, actually, no. His age, the age of our leadership, they're making a point about Biden, but you could say it generally. It's not actually an issue. Just because they have one off day doesn't mean that they're going to consistently have bad days. So it comes from the Daily Beast. And you see there, these two different articles. These two different articles come from the Daily Beast and two very different perspectives, obviously different writers, but it's interesting. The headline reads, Biden surfaces in Black Radio, WURD interview, got to keep moving is the little quote they have there. Quote, as the 81-year-old opened his time with WURD's Andrea Lawful Sanders, he brushed aside his performance against Donald Trump, saying, I had a bad debate, and moved quickly on to a laundry list of what he and his administration sees as achievements focused on the Black community. And you see there, like I talked about previously, he's just going to brush past it. He's going to say, hey, okay, we had that moment. We're going to keep on going. I failed. President Obama didn't have the best debate his first time around. Trump didn't have a great first debate, blah, 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 blah. You could point to plenty of examples where people didn't have great debates and they possibly turned it around. So then Lawful Sanders doesn't necessarily let it go. She returns to it. Quote, a lot of people are talking of the debate and your performance. Is there any reason for the American people to be concerned? Then Biden previewed what is likely to be his approach when asked about the debate and his cognition by ABC News' George Stephanopoulos on Friday in what will be his first TV interview, and said, laughing on the first sentence, quote, no, I had a bad debate. So this is the expanded quote here. Quote, but 90 minutes on stage does not erase what I've done for 3.5 years. I'm proud of the record. We've just got to keep moving, end quote. And I told you before, this is the laurels. They're going to sit on the laurels. They're going to say what they have achieved, but also they're just going to let the spin doctors keep on coming. And this is honestly, this is a pretty okay spin. It's not the worst spin. Admitting that you didn't have a good debate, let's be clear, admitting you don't have a good debate, you have to come out at the next debate. You have to come out on all these interviews. And they're laying the path here. They're mentioning the fact that he has his interview with George Stephanopoulos on Friday. So I'm recording this Thursday, but on Friday, you'll be listening. If you listen to the podcast on the first day, it will come out later on in the day around 6:30 on ABC. And they're laying the path for him. Okay, if he has this good one interview here, he's laying out his mission, what he sees as his benefits, what he did, laying out his record, saying, admitting I had a bad debate, but hey, we have lots of years behind us. They're laying out the fact that if he has a good long-form interview with George Stephanopoulos, all of this is great. And then if he is keeping with the line, hey, I had a bad debate, cool. Go with that. But that means the pressure is even higher. In September, if you have another debate, with President Trump and you are still the nominee at that point, which the Democrats would probably have to get him out before that with a contested convention, but if he has another terrible debate performance, you have to beg the Lord above that there are enough people that truly just hate Donald Trump enough not to vote for him, or there are just enough Democrat loyalists, or there are just enough people that really do like some of the policies he put out there and are willing to overlook his age. I do not think that is a lot of moderate Americans who haven't decided yet. I could definitely be wrong, and to pretend as though that anything is locked in the bag, that there's not going to be an October surprise one way or another. For all we know, there's another tape that comes out about Donald Trump saying something absolutely outrageous, and he was trying to bribe an election official. Anything could happen. There's no doubt about that. But the path that they're laying for Biden here is a very narrow one, and it has to be followed extremely close, because even if he clinches the nomination, that doesn't mean he's clear of the woods. And the fact that they are continuing on this road, when I said after the debate, and I said, oh, they're going to continue forward, they're going to get all their lackeys to come around, that was more just a feeling of how the Biden team was going to work, even though there was some disconcert in the media afterwards. But then within the last week, and this is why I wanted to give it a week before we talked about it, other concerns have been brought up, which is actually he may not be able to. He may not be able to say genuinely that, oh yes, we're going to step down because of these issues, or at least he won't step down yet. He'll give it a little bit of time. So then the really bad memory issues, the really bad recall / ability to communicate his senior moments are kind of faded a little bit. And then he'll step down nicely from the presidential election. So then he can't get a 25 amendment challenge in order to get him out of the presidency, which I thought was a very interesting point, because yes, if at this point he was to say, okay, hey, I'm out of the presidential, I understand that was a terrible senior moment, I'm not fit to run for president, then they would say, well, if you're not fit to run for president and it's like this all the time, then maybe you shouldn't actually be the president right now, which actually could be a very interesting, I don't think they want to ruin his legacy like that. I think they would have to, if there is a Democratic apparatus behind the scenes and they would have to be able to compel Joe Biden to leave, they would have to say, okay, hey, we're going to hold you up as the person that defeated Donald Trump. We're going to hold you up as the person that brought us back to a sense of normalcy, and we're not going to tarnish your message. And in order to do that, they would have to not throw him underneath the bus with the 25th Amendment. And let's be clear, it's mainly his cabinet that would actually have to bring the 25th Amendment. So it's complicated. But the point being that there is a path that is being laid here. I'm going to read the last closing paragraph of this article. Quote, whether interviews will be enough to settle Democrats' rolling crisis will not be immediately apparent. On CNN Thursday night, Michigan's Rep. Derby Dengel, a reliable Biden ally, but one with more vulnerable seat with some House members, told Casey Hunt that Biden had to be seen out more. He has to get out there and on a sustained basis and be spontaneous. One interview is not going to reassure folks. How about 1,000 interviews? I'm sorry, 1,000 interviews is not going to reassure me. Maybe somebody else it will, but if you've been living in the world where Biden's mental acuity has not been an issue and you see this one problem, sure, fair enough. But if you've been living in the other world where everybody is talking about the fact that he doesn't have his mental faculties about him, how when he tries to go off script, even at the Robert Hur, when he was trying to basically attack Robert Hur for saying that he was a gentle old man. If you're living in that world where you see these clips all the time, and I try to float in between both of them, I do listen to, the Pod Save America bros, hear the messaging there, listen to Breaking Points. I used to listen to Kyle Kalinske a little bit more, but he got too much for me. I couldn't. But, I listened to the Ben Shapiro's, the Clavens, the PBDs, the dailies, the Matter of Opinions, the left, right, centers. I try to listen to a broad spectrum of political actors. And even for someone who's floating in between, being in both worlds, I feel like it's very hard to imagine that you couldn't have, unless you're living in only the world that doesn't acknowledge his gaffes, in some of these issues and just tries to defend for him and saying all these things are not actually an issue, and then seeing him for the first time in that debate have an issue, then you could say, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's actually a valid perspective. He only had one bad time. He has to get out there and he has to do more interviews. If you've been living on the other side, it's like, no, this was the capping point. This was the end all. But that is what's interesting. If you're living in two different worlds, you're going to have very different perspectives about it. And the Democratic voters may be able, and that's why I said they'll probably just stick to it, because they can shape a narrative around him and they can make sure that he comes home strong for the presidency. Does that mean that he's going to win? No. But they can at least try to shape something so that it appears that he's strong enough and the DNC doesn't have to necessarily drop him. Does that mean he's going to win? I don't know. But all these things are very interesting. It is sad to see where we are going, but also there's hope, because at the end of the day, these people are going to have to retire. They're going to have to leave office. I think once Trump's out of the situation, he has a few populist and America First young people that are following up behind him. And whether or not you like that movement, at least it's fresh perspectives. You have the younger progressives who have had the ear of Biden more during this time, who are also finding their way. Whether or not I like either of their policy proposals on either side. The point being that these younger people are getting involved, and hopefully more younger moderate people also get involved as they look at some of their moderate. They're like, oh, you're a little bit out that way. You're a little bit out that way. I don't actually like either of those. Let's do a little modern neocon, a little populist neocon. Maybe there will be an upsurge of that. And whether, like I said, you don't have to like any of the policies, but the fact is a younger population that is more in tune with the current needs is probably going to be better than the gerontocracy that does not respect the current respect is the wrong word, doesn't take into consideration the current generation's needs, wants, and concerns as much, because they just don't know it, not because it's out of malice. But hey, that's enough with all that. Let's actually go to something positive. So I have for the Daily Delight, I'm going to provide the link to a video down in the comment section below that like and subscribe button. The headline for this one reads, "Adorable Skunk Families Road Crossing Delights Oregon Sheriff Deputies." And honestly, it's only like 20 seconds, and seeing the the little babies go forward and then come back for the mama, and then they all kind of go as a pile across the road. It's honestly hilarious. And it's just one of those beautiful things in nature that you get to see every once in a while. So like I said, if you want to check that out or any of today's articles, they'll be in the link in the description. Also, you can find down there the Twitter handle at your DailyFlip, or you can go through the links to the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, and Podvine. And I'm going to actually remove the Google Podcast link now, even though I've removed it from my speech. And with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.